you so much. So welcome everybody, and I know others are still going to be trickling in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Wendy Johnston, and I am a member of the SUNY Council on Assessment. And for those that are not familiar with SCoA, we are here to support efforts for our campuses with assessment and everything with rubrics to events like this. We are here to be your support system. And we'll there we go. And we have an annual Zoom in every year. And so this is my first time running it. So be gracious and patient with me. And this year it seemed very prudent that we focus on assessment in the age of AI, which is a topic we covered a couple of years ago, but I think now more than ever, it's the question of the validity of assessment is really at the forefront. How can we trust that the learning assessments are really reflecting learning if students are accessing AI to get it? How can we leverage AI to improve our assessments and the like? So that's what we're here today to present. So this is kind of just our agenda. So one, welcome. I just gave you a quick overview about SCoA. If you're going through your middle state self-study like my campus currently is, SCoA is also a fantastic resource for that, including providing mock visits ahead of your actual visit so you can prepare your campus well for success for your self-study visit, which we will be taking advantage of. I have a list of outcomes that we are hoping to achieve today. And I'm also going to introduce you to the panel and then have the panelists each give a little bit more information about themselves. So our goal today in looking at assessment in the age of AI is to distinguish characteristics of authentic assessment that promote genuine student understanding in an AI-rich environment. Analyze equity implications related to student access, digital literacy, and AI-enabled assessment tools. Formulate strategies for ethical, transparent integration of AI into assessment practices while upholding academic integrity, and to explore ways AI can enhance formative feedback to improve student learning and engagement. And just for your edification, just so you know that I'm not just a talking head about this, I actively am engaging with AI in my teaching practices and am utilizing it for assessment of student learning this semester in 2 of my courses directly. So I'm going to go ahead. So for those that don't know me, not only am I a member of SCoA, but I am a member of SUNY Adirondack here in beautiful, Lake George region of New York. I teach political science. I'm also chair of our social science division, among many other hats that I wear with this institution. Our panelists today, I'm going to welcome Dr. Sam Abramovich from University of Buffalo, Jeannie Brown Leonard from SUNY Adirondack, and Dr. Debora Ortloff, did I get that right? From Fingerlakes Community College. Each in their own right have been working with and dialoguing about AI and assessment, and I'm going to ask each of them to present a little bit more about themselves and what they do. And at this point, I'm going to stop sharing the screen because that's the end of the PowerPoint. No, we want to turn that off. So Sam, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so you all heard my name. I'm here at the University of Buffalo in the Graduate School of Education. I'm in a couple different departments, the Learning and Instruction Department and the Information Science Department. And I'm also the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs here. So basically, I get to play both roles, the administrative role, but also the instructor teacher role in terms of generative AI. And probably like every other person on this call, we're all students and kind of learning about generative AI at the same time. Basically, my viewpoint. Oh, and I should shout out to. I'm also lucky enough to be one of the SUNY AI SUNY fellows for AI for the public good. And there's a bunch of us, so I think some people are even here on the call, and shout out to them. We're all doing like important work in terms of just thinking about kind of guiding and helping SUNY forward in terms of generative AI. But my particular anchor point is I believe that generative AI is kind of, it's already reshaping how people learn, create, demonstrate understanding. And so I have a research area around assessment and micro-credentials, and I'm starting from this premise that technology can fundamentally change the nature of our work, and assessments have to evolve with it. So in short, generative AI is giving us a chance to design assessments that are more authentic, more equitable, and more aligned with the future that our students are going to be entering.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Jeannie.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jeannie Brown-Leonard. I serve as the Director of Assessment and Learning Resources at SUNY Adirondack. I've only been here about a year and a half, and my background includes a long history in higher education, including a lot of student success work. So my focus has been student-centered. I've worked as a faculty director of an adult degree completion program. And now I'm working with faculty again, thinking about how we support student learning and are able to deliver, demonstrate that we deliver on our promise to our students. I'm fortunate to co-chair our academic assessment committee with a faculty member. Recently was named our accreditation liaison officer and co-chair with Wendy Johnston our middle states work. I also co-chair our diversity committee and work with our strategic enrollment management group. So I'm wearing lots of different hats, but feel fortunate that I work at a place that has asked us to lean into the AI experience. And I think it started with an AI agility 30-day challenge that I still have my notebook here with all the things that I worked through and learned. I would say I am intermediate in my engagement with AI, but always curious and always interested in thinking about how we leverage tools and resources to support learning and to support efficiencies. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with my colleagues on this panel.
All right, and Debora.
Yeah, great. Hi, great to see all of you virtually, so to speak. My name is Debora Ortloff, Fingerlakes Community College. I'm Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and Assessment. I've been here for a little over a decade, moved into administration after a few years in faculty, and prior to that, I was a faculty member in the University of Houston system. And in addition to whatever it is strategic initiatives and assessment means, co-lead the FLX AI Hub, which is a board-funded and donor-funded group we have here at FLCC that serves both the greater community for AI learning and learning together, as well as our faculty and staff here at FLCC. So I'm very excited about this work. I'm very interested in what does this new emergent technology and tool mean for educational access, educational equity? What are some of the big heady questions, but what are also some of the interesting and innovative things we might be able to do? So I've really been digging in quite a bit in the sort of various hats, to Jeannie's point, that we all tend to wear in our jobs, and I'm excited to be talking about all of that with you today.
Great, thank you for the introductions. For those that are here to listen to our panel and hear about their expertise, we are also monitoring the chat. So as you have questions or other thoughts as our speakers are talking about the various questions I'm going to present them with, please feel free to put it in the chat and we will try to address them as they come up, and we will have a Q&A towards the end of our time together. So let's kick it off. And the first question I want to dig into is about authenticity and integrity. What does authentic assessment look like when AI tools can easily generate high quality written work, code, or analyses? And how do we assess students' genuine understanding? And I'm going to kick it first to Debora.
Well, thanks. Okay, well, I think this is, a really fundamental question, and it's one that in my work with our assessment committee here at FLCC has come up or tends to come up the most. And I think much of this is a more fundamental question, right? As we as educators are looking at this new emergent technology, this new tool, as in the past, although it's been a while since we've had a major disrupting tool to learning product, we have to wrestle with it from an educator perspective. That starts from a curriculum and instruction perspective, as well as from an assessment perspective. So when I'm thinking about that authentic assessment, I want to also be thinking about what is the learning intention that the faculty member has put forward. So when we think about the artifact, what type of AI interaction or expectation is being put forward, right? Is there a syllabus statement or an assignment statement? Let me give you an example. One of the areas that we've talked about this a lot here at FLCC, and my co-lead in the FLX AI Hub has really implemented in his classrooms. He's a computer science professor. Some of you may know him, Dave Gadoo, so all credit to him with this example. He really dug in and was saying, how am I going to use AI in my, one of my basic coding courses? And when he first went in, he said, okay, use AI, let's see how this goes. And what he found was that some of his students did not pick up the necessary fundamental skills to evaluate how their codes were coming out. So then he went back and he scaffolded it and he looked sort of week by week and assignment by assignment and said, until this point in the semester, you can't use AI. You have to learn and demonstrate these fundamental skills. So his own assessment of that needed to reflect that he was able to see they had fundamental skills. So there were various ways he adjusted that, but it was also transparency in saying, this is the expectation. After this point, you can use AI, and you're going to reflect on what you learned from it, problems you found, and you're going to disclose to me how you used it, and it's going to become part of our assignment. So I'm using that example because it's fairly specific around this idea of coding. But the concept that I'm trying to demonstrate here is the authentic assessment has to come from the learning outcome and from our conversations and intentions with our students. So it's not just a question about the assessment. And I do understand that there's a bigger piece there about, okay, if we have things we've already collected and how has that happened? How do we approach that? But fundamentally, this goes back to both the learning outcome and the learning intention from the faculty member. So we want to make sure that as we're making this shift, we're in conversation with making sure that's a part of the syllabus or the assignment brief, and in our assessment planning that we're literally recording that. I like to say when we're putting our assessment plans together, somebody who isn't you needs to understand what was the intention of that assignment. So when we're coming in and we're assessing it, we understand that in fact, it is an authentic assessment and it's really looking at the learning outcome. So some of those bigger pieces and bigger conversations that are curricular and instructional need to be tied to this move towards authentic assessment in the age of AI. So I'll stop there because there is a lot more to talk about, but I'm sure some of the other panelists would like to weigh in on that as well. Thanks.
Sure. Jeannie, you want to go next?
I'd love to. And Debora, I love your emphasis on the intent. Like we've got to connect the method with the goal, right?
Yeah.
And I guess I would argue that in many ways, as we think about AI use, whether it's built into an assignment, as you just described, or if it's just a fallback. Students, take a shortcut to use AI when we really would prefer they do their own work in that space. That it goes back to this idea of explicitness in what we expect from our students. So any authentic assessment, any assignment, I would argue, benefits from clarity, right? If what causes students to deviate from what we expect often are the things that were the case when AI didn't exist, right? So we can prevent cheating or misuse by the way we design our assignments, by being clear about what expectations, that we are explicit about whether AI can be used, and if so, to what extent and in what ways, that we are flexible about things like deadlines. The literature, I think, in academic integrity, which by the way is also AI, so that's kind of fun. In the academic integrity space, most students, I don't think we should assume they're going to cheat. And in fact, we should assume integrity and then set up the conditions so that the time pressure, the stress, the things that are often undergird a choice to take a shortcut are taken out of the equation as much as possible. So it takes intentionality and purposefulness and empathy, I would argue, on behalf of our faculty, to create those spaces for authentic learning to happen, and therefore the assessments we hope are also authentic.
Great, thank you. Sam?
Yeah, so I probably approach this from a slightly different perspective, which is I agree with what my fellow panelists are saying, what Debora and Jeannie are saying, but I'm thinking about it just purely from like an assessment design perspective, right? And the sizzling hot take I'll say, right, is that probably a lot of assessments that we all use, that I myself also have used in the past, are not actually designed particularly well. They're not designed to really pedagogically sound kind of methods. And so now where we have this kind of, new paradigm shift, right, in technology, we're revealing a lot of the flaws in what are these kind of classically used assessments. And so what we really have to do now is shift from a focus on what the product is of this of an assessment to the process, right? To care more about student decision-making, reasoning, how they evaluate, and design assessments toward that kind of goal. And I'll offer this, right? So I'm trained as a learning scientist. There's all these kind of learning science specific theories and practices and an assessment. I think the one that's maybe the most apt right now is something called evidence-centered design. And evidence-centered design, if you're not familiar with it, it is kind of a it's built out of psychometric kind of, theory, so to speak. And in fact, probably its biggest claim to fame to date is that it was used to design the advanced placement, the AP exam for art. And if you're unfamiliar, there is an AP art exam. And no, it is not just recollection of who famous artists were and can you name this particular art piece. It is in fact an evaluation of a student's, a high schooler's, artistic ability. So you might say, well, how the heck can you do that as a standardized exam? And so what they basically said is, well, let's start first with what is evidence that the student has this artistic ability. And I can go into more details and bore you all with, although I find it fascinating, about stuff like, submitting portfolio work and examples, right? But what we're talking about now is that if there is a concern now that with generative AI growing more and more ubiquitous, right? Can you say that about ubiquitous? It's either ubiquitous or not. Anyways, growing more and more accessible. We have to ask ourselves, great, so then what is the evidence that we believe as instructors, that students themselves believe in, right? That is of them having achieved the learning objectives of a particular course or a particular program. And if we can think about evidence, right, that we all believe, that we all think is believable, that we all think is valuable in terms of those learning objectives, then yes, then we can kind of integrate, accept, and even leverage the value of these kind of generative AI tools to produce, a new type of, reliable and valid measure of learning.
Great, thank you. I kind of have a follow-up question to this one. And it's this, as we're seeing AI become more readily part of our students' academic tool diet, we're starting to see that knee-jerk reaction of faculty to go back away from online assessments to in-class, more traditional assessments. I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, our thoughts on it from, well, I'll just give you my thoughts. How's that?
Yes, absolutely.
So I would say there are a couple things to consider there. Absolutely, that is a good way. And again, going back to my statement previously, we really want to be looking at what is the learning outcome? What is the instructor's intent? What are we trying to understand about learning? That is still the fundamental question, regardless of AI. And then looking at what is the best way for us to understand at which process point do we need to measure that? Do we need to get into that? And then, you know, as Sam was saying, there are some different ways to approach that. So looking at an in-class essay and looking at production of creativity, whatever that means for whatever field you're in, is a great way to say, for this particular learning outcome, I really want to make sure that this is being produced in this way in this time, and that's going to help me the most. So that is absolutely a great option. Now, that being said, does it present particular hurdles for the logistics of assessment and or the inclusion of folks that may not be able to be in a classroom, right? Whatever that means, they're online or whatnot. Sure, but there are always logistical challenges, and that is part of what we need to do as educators and as assessment professionals to say, okay, so this is the learning intent. This is what our instructor needs to be able to know their students are learning, and this is the appropriate way to do this. So now let's solve for X, right? And not necessarily be worried about, well, that's a logistical improbability, so we can't do that. You always want to be going back to what is the outcome we're trying to understand, and then produce the solution, both in terms of the assessment and the logistics that may go along with that. Long before there was online anything, and long before there was assessment software or any of these other things, we were still assessing and we were still looking at making sure we were understanding our students' learning. So these are things that can be solved, and they can also be solved in a modern age, and understanding accessibility. I think it's really important that we solve for the right problem rather than necessarily put up a gatekeep and say, well, that's too hard, or that means these students can't do it, or you can't do that. We really want to be looking at what's the learning intent, what does the instructor need to understand about the learning, what does the institution or department or whatever unit we want to talk about need to understand about the learning, and then solve from there. And that's still fundamental. That's good assessment practice. Before AI and after AI, it's still good assessment practice.
I just I'll just jump in real quick and say, though I agree with Debora's kind of, you know, overall arching point there, right? I would actually come out and say, no, actually, the reversion to like a blue books or non-technology based assessments actually is a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid.
I don't disagree with you.
Okay.
It is a Band-Aid, but
okay, so
still.
Well, so I understand totally your point, and you're making solid logical points. But let me offer this, right, which is that the value often of assessment, right, is that not just to the instructor, but to the student, in that it's a chance for them to develop and exercise the skills and knowledge that they're learning in environments and settings where they'll be using those skills and knowledge, right? And so, like, whether it's coding or whether it's getting up in front of an audience or speaking, right? The more removed an assessment is from what will be authentic practice going forward is to lower the value of the assessment. It might still be a measure of learning at a particular, to provide either formative or summative feedback, but it loses some of its value, right, by not being as authentic as possible. And I worry that if collectively, if the answer that we look at is an approach to generative AI, is to like, look, let's go back to blue books, right? Let's go back to this, and then eventually, sometime down the line, we'll figure out how to incorporate generative AI into assessment. Well, then we increase at least from a viewpoint from students, but I would argue in reality, a disconnect between what you do in a classroom, in a course in higher ed, and what your real life workplace is. And in a world now where there are a lot of people who are advocating that higher education is less and less of a good idea, that it's less and less of a good value for your time and money, right? Where you could learn, you could go and watch YouTube videos. You can ask generative AI to just teach you stuff, right? And I worry if we move assessment away from authentic practice, further away from authentic practice, we lessen the potential value of a higher education.
Jeannie.
I would just love in conversation here with my colleagues. So Sam, I'm curious if the ubiquity, right, of AI now and its availability, does it give us an opportunity to kind of challenge practices that maybe some of our faculty haven't critiqued in their own teaching enterprise, right? So what you're describing is don't just go back and revert back to an old way of doing things because it's safe or known. Let's reimagine. And how do we incentivize that? How do we, and can AI be one of those levers that kind of ignites that creativity, that interest, and can we advance not only what our students are learning, but how they're learning and how we are relevant in the world today. Can AI help us in that conundrum?
Absolutely. And I want to be clear, I don't want to put words in Debora's mouth, either too, like where she was suggesting that this is the right way or approach. I just want to be clear that that's not it. But I just worry about the overall messaging. And yes, look, absolutely, this is an opportunity. And this is so hard. I'll go further. It sucks. I teach mostly online asynchronous courses. I've had assessments that I've been using for a decade. And what feels like relatively overnight, I'm having to rethink conceptually all these types of assessments. And I have one of my doc students in our Zoom. I don't know if I have any of my other students in the Zoom. I'm not sure how effective I'm even being, in rethinking these assessments. But the point is, I think, is like I just feel like I have to push my own self and my own course design going forward. And I agree with you, Jeannie, that this is an opportunity to experiment and maybe bring back some of that kind of design ethos around assessments for courses.
Great, thank you. This is awesome having this conversation because I know that there's some of us on my campus who are like starting to embrace the idea, and we're starting to use it for assessment and other educational opportunities, also skill development. And then we have those that are running away from it. So it's an interesting look at higher ed and what we think we should be doing and that rigor that we hold to with that. I'd like to move on to our next question, and I will pop that in the chat, is about equity and access. How can institutions ensure that AI-enhanced assessment practices do not deepen inequities for students who lack access to advanced technologies or digital literacy? And I'll give it to Sam first.
Yeah, I'll be short because I think I'm sucking up a lot of oxygen, virtual oxygen here. So basically, I think the approach that I think resonates the most with myself, and I think with the other people, is that AI literacy is becoming, if not already, a prerequisite for employment in certain kind of professions. And so it's institutions that have to ensure equal access to tools and training, right? We can avoid inequity by making AI access and literacy an institutional responsibility. So if AI is required in students' futures or in some way, shape, or form, then it's the institution that needs to provide access and make sure that it's not about just those who have access to premium tools, but that all students have access to it.
I would underscore exactly what Sam's saying and maybe put a little bit more urgency on that as well. I would go so far as to say it's an imperative. All of the evidence that we're seeing from employer surveys and whether that's national or local advisory boards, et cetera, et cetera. And this is something I'm fairly deeply engaged in because of the work I do with the FLX AI Hub. So I have a lot of those conversations personally as well. The students that we are preparing are going to be at a disadvantage if they are not AI literate. And that is sometimes field specific, as my colleague was indicating. And that means that those programs need to really be leaning in and thinking through what that means in their fields. But it is also, you know, not field specific, meaning regardless of what they do and where they go and how they go forward, this literacy, as well as the ability to communicate, problem solve, and be critical around tools, some of those good liberal arts skills that we've always talked about are absolutely necessary as we deal with this emergent technology. That is imperative. That means it's imperative for our work. It's imperative that we engage with it, and it's imperative that our administration, our leadership, our systems, our structures are taking seriously what that means for equity and access to priority tools, whatever, again, that's going to mean. And it is going to mean things differently at University of Buffalo or at FLCC, and it's going to mean something a little bit different in a program in robotics than it is in creative writing. But there's an imperative, and we're responsible for that, both as faculty and as leadership. And I would argue also to our system leaders as well. There needs to be support for that. I understand around the gen ed, and we're all doing great work on that, and that's very exciting, but there's another level to that conversation that needs to be had.
Right. Jeannie?
Yeah, ditto. Excellent. I think we need to be kind of lean into our institutional policies to make sure we have kind of inclusive and scaffolded pedagogies and approaches to making it available to all of our students. I also think there's an angle on this question around the sort of inherent biases that exist in AI, right? So we have this obligation, I think, to be aware and make visible and interrogate the products. Recognize that when you scrape all this knowledge out there in the world, there are certain voices that are overrepresented and others that are underrepresented, and then that can be leveraged as a teaching tool as well, right? To use that critical engagement to say, what about this works? What about it doesn't work? It's, you know, AI is getting better all the time at reducing hallucinations and so forth. But it's what's wrong here? What could be different? I also love really creative approaches where you can ask AI to sort of assume a role of a historical figure or a certain perspective and engage in dialogue or you know, conversation or problem solving or bring this new perspective to this thing I'm wrestling with. And that offers an opportunity for there to be a kind of like an awareness of diverse points of view, and may not have all the answers, but it could be a very rich tool in that learning space.
Right. So we do have a question from Stephen H. in the chat. And so, yes, this is where the questions would go. So thank you. The main issue I have with integrating AI in my English course, Gen Ed in Education, Communication, Written, and Oral, is that the SUNY learning outcome begins with students' will. So how can I say I am assessing a student's, say, ability to create college-level text when a large portion of it is produced by generative AI and not the student? How do I assess any AI content when the outcome mandates students' will?
There's multiple ways to answer this question in multiple perspectives. There's no one specific right way. the approach, I would argue, right, again, is kind of focused on what is the importance and the value of the learning objective of the goal? What do we actually want the student to know? So, for example, in this particular, this will be a little hyperbolic, this will be exaggerated, right, just to kind of illustrate the point. So if the goal is students will generate college level text, then I would say that learning objective is not the right one. It's a bad learning objective because it might have been good at one point if what you really just want is students to generate college level text, right? But now we have a tool that can create it. So I would say, what was the point behind creating the college level text, right? Was it to produce a product, an artifact that represents deep understanding of conceptual ideas or concepts? And if it is, that's the case, which I would hope would be the case, right? That would be the value of writing, is to show evidence that a student has been engaged in deep thinking or understanding or mastered certain skills. Then what is a way to then create evidence of that same understanding or skills now that we all have access to these kind of tools? And there's ways to do it, right? There could be ways to say, like, look, can the student evaluate the quality levels in college level text? Can the a student take a certain college level text and apply it in certain settings or contexts? There are ways to do this a little harder in the abstract. I think it goes back to points that Debora and Jeannie were saying, right? Is that context matters tremendously.
Great. Thank you, Sam. So our next question deals with ethics and transparency. What are the best practices for disclosing or regulating student and faculty use of AI tools in the assessment process? Let's go with Jeannie first.
Disclosure. I think my answer is that we should be transparent about what's expected, that syllabus statements include clear guidance on the ways in which students may or may not engage in AI use, and then the why behind it needs to be, I think, part of the conversation early in the semester and maybe repeated, right? We know we need to revisit these things. I think faculty who are using AI should also be explicit and transparent about the ways in which AI has supported the work that they're doing, whether that's the development of a rubric or the way they've developed an assignment. Faculty on our campus, a small subset, have created an AI mini course to support faculty learning about how to leverage AI in their teaching enterprise. And I've been going through that course and I love it. I'll come across a set of guidelines and it'll say at the bottom, this part of this course was created in collaboration with AI, and it is absolutely their work, but it has been enhanced or supplemented, or they've engaged in AI in some way. And so the level of disclosure, how much you have to share, what that looks like, I think we can rely on our publication guidelines and manuals and for citations. I think a lot of those now have AI citation guidance, but also institutional policy and then course level policy, what's expected. And I just can't emphasize enough the importance of it being explicit and that there's a conversation around it so that ambiguity that can lead to misuse is reduced.
Yeah, I think you really hit on so many of the aspects here. A couple of things just to amplify what you were saying. Incredibly important that we model this, right, for our students and for our colleagues, right? That as we're working with AI, talking about it, saying, so I'm using this in this way. This is helping me do this. So it's that transparency is part of our everyday conversation and not just in the written word. Because I think that also helps people understand potential uses and where things are going and how ideas are coming about. But absolutely setting up a means by which we say, this is how I want this cited. Going back to my previous example from my colleague in computer science, right? giving guidelines to the students of when they can use and when they can't use, but as they're using, this is how I want you to disclose this. This is how I want you to cite it. This is the expectation of reflection on how you're using this. Those are things we need to put into place, but model ourselves as well. And I think that's a piece where that's been a little bit uneven, certainly at my institution, but I think in other places as well, right? Where we have early adopters, we have mavericks out there doing all sorts of great things, and people getting really excited and not necessarily always saying, hey, this is how I'm using this, or this is what I'm doing. So we really want to encourage that level of transparency across the institution. The other piece that I just absolutely want to underscore here is we have experts on this. Every single one of us have experts in our libraries, because librarians are the smartest people in the world and know so much about citation and transparency and being up to date on this. And many of them are very deeply engaged in this work. There are some institutions that are also moving towards making sure one librarian has that as sort of a scope of work, because this is emergent technology that's moving really quickly. But our librarians are such an invaluable resource. Obviously, they're engaged in the information literacy conversation around the AI changes in SUNY Gen Ed, but it goes beyond that, and they need to also be advising the college on this work.
Okay,
Great.
I'm gonna come out with a sizzling hot take, y'all, on this one, okay? So just kind of thinking about in particular student disclosure of AI use, but which is often kind of, I think, probably the most common aspect of like a syllabus statement around generative AI. You must disclose, if it's allowed at all, you must disclose. And I'd say it's become a ritual. And rituals are not the same as pedagogical value. Unless the reflection on AI use directly ties to learning outcomes, this kind of mandatory transparency tells instructors nothing really about what a student actually understands, right? And there is value to student transparency about the use of generative AI. So if it's like when AI use itself is part of the assignment, right? So why did you adopt why did you adopt or reject? Great, makes sense, right? Or if, look, you're really trying to assess something that has to remain independent of AI. I want a student to be able, it's a standard in our field. It's important, I think, in terms of, liberal arts knowledge for a student to be able to do something without access to a technology or generative AI. Great, I understand. But beyond that, I actually don't really think disclosure, right? Disclosure, it's not the same value as a citation, right? Because nothing about a student's reasoning, evidence base, or intellectual lineage is clarified by their revealing they use the tool. It doesn't really assess learning, right? You can't reach a conclusion. If a student student A used generative AI and student B didn't, that doesn't tell you whether, you can't assume, oh, student B really understands it and student A doesn't, right? Just because they use this tool. It can, I can go on and on. It can create a false sense of integrity. It can unintentionally penalize honest students, right? Because there are faculty that say like, oh, just tell me if you used it. I'm like, well, you used it, so I'm a little suspicious of you, Sam, because you did use it, right? So I really do worry about the value of transparency in terms of pedagogical design.
Yeah, and just to clarify the example I was giving, because I do think Sam's making an important point here. That again goes back to what I was saying previously about what is the learning intent and what is the learning outcome, right? Reflecting for the sake of reflecting is not necessarily helpful. Making sure we create metacognitive opportunities for our students, incredibly important for the teaching of critical thinking processes, right? So that hasn't changed, right? This is a new tool, but that concept has not changed. We want to build it in with deliberation into the work that we're doing. And again, I know I keep saying it, but it does go back to the learning outcome and the learning intent. What are we teaching? What is that walk out the door knowledge? And what is our best way of using this tool, acknowledging this tool, and building this tool and our knowledge of the tool as a part of the learning process?
All right, I'm going to take us right now to the chat because we got a couple things in the chat. One, I'm going to hit Chris Price first, even though I know his is lower down. The suggestion we're making that we model AI disclosure to our students, but what should we tell nervous faculty who worry that students will respond negatively to their AI use? In other words, how do we address the criticism? What are we paying for if you're just using AI? And I'm going to take this one initially because I have been showing students that I use AI and modeling what I consider, quote, good behavior so that they will cite it properly, use it properly. And so I do show them, for instance, in my political theory class, I prompted AI to create a compare and contrast chart of Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and brought that to class and had this and told the students up front that this is what I asked AI to do. Here is the results. Let's look at it critically. Let's see where it hit the mark. Let's see where it missed the mark. So it's not just that I used AI to create every ounce of content in my course. It's that I'm using AI to take my expertise and help me maybe package it differently, help me develop a different type of assessment, a more creative way of thinking, something I didn't think about, and then showing that to the students. So I'm always very upfront when I do use AI. And I try to model that behavior and the citation and all of that, trying to address that. How can you just you use AI? What am I paying for? Because you know what, I still bring my expertise to the classroom for that. Another question we had, well, let's give opportunities here. I know, Deborah, you already answered it in the chat, but maybe Jeannie or Sam, you want to weigh in?
I just have a small addition, which is this idea of still a value added to the expertise and the skill and experience of our faculty, right? And so AI is a complement, not a replacement. At least I don't think it should be. And the that argument, well, I could just go to AI to get my my knowledge. It's just not facts, right? Learning is about integration and connection and critical thinking and all these other elements that our faculty are particularly well positioned to support. So again, it's not abdicating the work to AI. It's engaging it in a creative way, so that that it's additive. It's a kind of a value added for the buzzword out there, return on investment, if you will, right? The things that can be where 1 + 1 = 4 instead of 2, right? It's an enhancement, an opportunity to prepare people for the workforce, but also make that in-class experience interesting and engaging.
All right. Let's see. I also want to point out in the chat that Ellen Gambino shared with all of us that we all have the ability to enroll in SUNY's Google AI Essentials and AI prompting courses. It's free for anyone with a SUNY email address, so I would encourage you to do it. I have already done the Google AI Essentials. My next goal is to do the prompting course. So I can speak to the value of it for sure. The next question it comes from Janet Rosenbaum, and it's on what basis do you think that students will all be using AI in their future work? So do we need to prepare them for AI? And I'm not sure that Ace Mogul's estimate is only 5% of work can be profitably performed by AI. Empirically, AI can do many tasks, but it requires so much work to fix it that it's not profitable, and gives us a couple of resources. Again, I want to kind of tackle this one first. Having gone to presentations from Human Skills AI that brought in career professionals from places like Rocket Mortgage and Progressive Insurance and the like, they are all saying that AI is a value skill that they're all looking for in their employees to have. So I think it's definitely something we need to think about in terms of, how do we get our students to engage with it and learn how to use it. As for the profitability of AI, well, I think that's another bailiwick that's outside my expertise.
I'll go further, and this is a MIT professor who's writing this paper, so I feel like I can punch on this because I'm punching up. I'm not punching down here, right? Like they're not worried. This professor is doing quite all right. This is bad. This is a bad supposition, and it's kind of bad. First, you can attack the work based on it's it's predicting the future based on the existing model, as if like how things are today is going to remain consistent. And all I'll ask all of y'all is, what was this world of generative AI a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Drastically different, right? And so why do we assume productivity rates are going to remain kind of stable as if they are right now? And then the second thing too is that, sure, this is economic policy. It's coming from an economist. I'm not worried about the future of businesses. I'm worried about the future of the individual students that coming through our programs, right? And so whether they're using generative AI to help businesses be more profitable or not, maybe the profit doesn't increase. Maybe the student has to work less to do the same job, and so they have more time to take care of the things that they need to take care of. Or maybe they're able to leverage skills and knowledge that they've learned in courses to build their own business, to fight for non-business related things like just civil rights and more equity and social justice within their communities. I'm not. I think this kind of economics paper is providing a rather narrow scope, and I would hate for us in SUNY to make institutional policy based on it. That being said, I'm beating up on this paper. It's Janet's question is exactly the right one, and we need to be asking these questions and thinking about these things.
Great, thank you. Another question just came in from Dr. Mark Lewin is, how do we reconcile with the use of AI with the environmental costs that come with it? Can we consider it ethical if some of the data centers that house AI are impacting water access to people that live around it? Anybody want to take that one on?
I'll give you another take, right? Which is to say that these are real concerns and these are real problems, and they need to be addressed. And predictably and sadly, we know that the communities that are often hit by these kind of environmental impacts are the ones that come from lowest socioeconomic status, the ones that have been historically kind of underrepresented, underserved by systems. But the answer is to not go to generative AI, to not use it, or to not increase its use to those same kind of communities, because then what we're talking about here is saying, good, it's only for those that can afford it, only those who live away from communities, or we can dump it off on some other kind of geographic setting. The answer is to find solutions to things like power and water consumption, right? And we can talk about this. A great parallel, it's really going to go outside the box here, but a great parallel is nuclear power, right? Where we, if we had kind of we became kind of concerned as a society about nuclear power, worldwide, by the way, and its potential negative impacts. But in fact, the solution we wound up going with, right, coal-fired power plants, predictably have caused way more death and destruction and inequity than nuclear power has ever produced. And so I am a little worried, right, that we're going to just repeat the same kind of problem, right? That we're going to say, great, we have to worry about the power consumption, we have to worry about the environmental challenges, and instead of finding solutions specific to those challenges, we're going to say, great, let's not use this amazing tool that can really improve so much of people's lives.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? I have another chat comment.
I would just echo that I wrestle with those questions too. I mean, these are really challenging, thorny, wicked problems, right? And I have a long commute, and so I was listening to the Daily this morning, and it was it was all about, is this AI phenomenon a bubble or not, right? And there are billions and billions of dollars being invested into these data centers. And um, like a lot of times when the world is more complex than we can handle, I think about my sphere of influence and where I can try to manage and cope with some of these very, very difficult and things I feel like I don't have much, I'm not able to control. So I focus in a little bit and think about some of what Sam was saying. It's there, it's going to be happening. How can I think about making those challenges visible? How can we be kind of engage in a conversation about those ethical concerns? But so far, it hasn't stopped me from still participating, because whether I participate or not, it's happening. So I'm not satisfied with that answer by any means, but keep asking those questions. I think that's part of the exercise here.
Absolutely. So somebody else, Marilyn brought up, trying to just digest the question. In an asynchronous online course, how can I then know that a student responded to that question and the student hadn't asked AI to respond, i.e. on Brightspace? Turnitin might tell me that 56% was AI generated, and then I could check that with another ChatGPT checker software. Now what? This assumes my syllabus is clear regarding what can and cannot be done with using AI, as well as how to cite it, which it does. At some point, we need effective policy and desire to enforce policy. This could be construed as a negative approach, but how can we enforce otherwise?
So I teach online asynchronous courses, right? And for full transparency, I had a little bit of time a couple years ago where I started noticing some student responses looking similar, and I thought maybe there was some online database somewhere where they might have been sharing some assignments or previous course assignments. And then around kind of the early days of these generative AI tools, I started plugging my assignments straight into the generative AI tool to see what would happen. And, you could still hear the echoes of my screams, somewhere in the ethos, because I was like, oh my God, this is what's happening, right? They're just plugging stuff away. What I did was I threw out then the way I was doing assessment. I changed, the way I was saying I had used before, discussion board responses where students were asked to kind of respond to certain specific prompts. I asked them to create a grant proposal at the end. This is like for future librarians. I had them. They were responding to each other, and when I saw that there are these generative AI tools that are even some of them explicitly designed for discussion board posts, right? And then, by the way, you can also say there are my favorite is the snake oil of AI detection, right? Because it's so easy to fool. And in fact, you'll go and search online, and it's this like kind of Cold War mentality where there are these tools that are specifically designed for you to plug in text, and they'll remix the text just enough so that it lowers its hit on the AI detection tools. And so to me, this is a losing battle. And the only way to win a losing battle is to not battle it at all. So what I did was I threw it all out. And so I said, great, you know what? The first half of my online asynchronous course is I'm going to require all students to use as much generative AI as they want, but to design what is going to be their individualized summative assessment for this course. And I step them through it and I scaffold them through it. And then the second half of the course is they got to do the assessment. And it's up to them to make the argument. Here are the learning objectives. Here's the goals. Make the argument as to why this particular assessment that you're proposing isn't just a symbolic of something that generative AI can produce, but is actually symbolic of your deeper understanding and learning. And so I'm adding the value to me is like, great, it's individualized representative of their assessment. It's they're learning how to use generative AI assessment tools to kind of generative AI tools to kind of help develop some of this kind of like knowledge and skills about what it can really do and what it can't do. I feel like at least that I'll have accomplished. Is that the right approach, or is that working? I don't even want to tell you. I'll tell you at the end of this semester. I'll tell you, probably around the third or fourth iteration, I try this and see if it's really working. But anecdotally, I've gotten a lot more positive feedback than a policy previously where I kept all my assessments the same and I said, just tell me whether you use generative AI or not. So that's my only answer. You have to change fundamentally the assessment you're using.
Yeah, and I think one thing that is really challenging right now is we don't know all of the answers to this. And the emergent technology is also changing really quickly. But we have been here before. No, we haven't been here before with AI, but there have been other over the sort of history of learning, other technological advances that have challenged us to think about how are we teaching this? What will this look like? What does writing look like post AI? What does the idea of understanding argument and use of evidence mean in my field when the internet started, right? When tools became widely used that looked at citation software, that looked at in the field of statistics, there's a very interesting paper that was written in the 1970s about the demise of mathematical knowledge in the field of statistics because of the advent of basic statistical software. These are challenges that come to us as educators. Is this a big one? Absolutely. Is it very fundamental to how we're approaching things? Yes, but I think Sam is really posing the right question here, which is, we may need to change. How do I need to change in his situation in that context? That's the approach he's taking. And living with that discomfort and that not knowing, and also not necessarily having a singular answer. I appreciate the question and the sort of challenge. We're going to have a policy and we're going to need to enforce it. And that may be specifically true in particular course sections and particular disciplines, but I'm not sure we're going to have a point where we have a singular answer for this at the higher education level, because we need to continue to approach teaching and learning with this tool and what that means. And we have to sit with some of that discomfort and we have to work through some of that and try new approaches. But I think if there is a wrong approach, and I'm not sure there is a wrong approach because I think we're very early in this and we're figuring things out as professionals, as educators. But if there is a wrong approach, I think the wrong approach is to say, I'm not engaging with that. This isn't part of my world. I think that is not something we can do.
Can I just echo Deborah's point, because I love it. It's absolutely correct. We have tackled these kind of things before. And my favorite example is that I think it's actually was like Socrates actually recounting kind of like a story about people's concern that writing, this new technological advancement of writing is going to ruin philosophy. Because writing will produce forgetfulness, because now you can just write down things
A good example.
rather than have to remember them, right? You don't, the words, you can write down words and you'll never get immediate feedback on them because, you're no longer speaking them. It could take forever for you to get feedback on what you've written. And so, there's downsides to everything.
Absolutely. For Sam specifically, there is a follow-up question from Frank. Thank you for putting this in here. As a follow-up to Sam's assessment idea, can't AI complete the assignment that you created? Is it possible to create assessment in an asynchronous course?
Is it possible? Absolutely. Is it probable or likely, I don't know. This becomes, I would argue, so it's a very fair question, but the argument is are we trying to eliminate cheating or bypassing of the rules, or are we trying to create the most pedagogically, interactive, strongest learning opportunity that we can? I think for all the effort that in higher education we spend on policing cheating, if we took half of that and instead worked on, goes back to, I think, point Jeannie was making, Debora was making, right? If we're instead engaging in rethinking our ways to learning and approach, right, then let's remove the value of cheating. Let's not have, things where the video camera is making sure eye contact, is spent looking at the screen or things like that. Look, I don't want to reveal any secrets from my childhood, but one can get very clever on how to cheat your way through all kinds of assignments, so, and I have 2 teenagers, and they're honest and they've never done anything bad ever again, but they've seen other kids do stuff and they could tell you stories,
Mine too.
Yeah. So Frank, your question is incredibly valid, right? Is it possible? Yes, I think it's possible to create assessments where it's not that it's impossible to cheat, but that the value of doing the assignment so overwhelms the value of bypassing or cheating your way through it that it's worth it.
Great, thank you. Donna Wilkerson Barker points out, working on the premise that no assessment is AI proof, it seems to me that we can integrate AI into all the formative learning work we engage in, but to truly measure learning, there has to be moments where students show what they know in formats that are tech-free. Oral presentations, writing in class, design case studies and analyzing them in person, experiential learning guided by skilled observations, etc. A hybrid between the innovative potential of AI and tried and true assessment measures. And that's really a great point that you're making, Donna. And I would say I am in my political theory class, the assessment I'm using with the students with AI is demonstrated to have the students show me in how they interact with the AI that they've understood the philosophy that we've been reading. So the assessment is that they have to, I gave them a very prescriptive prompt to feed into the AI of their choice, and they are pick one of our philosophers. So let's say they pick Hobbes. And to have AI take the persona of Hobbes and the work that we read and have that back and forth debate. And it's in the students' prompting, because they have to give me the transcript, that I see their knowledge coming out if they can debate back and forth on that. So there's that piece to it. It worked well with my cannabis class where they debated opening a cannabis store in New York and all the regulations. They were able to show me where they understood the regulations and what AI was telling them. So I think there's ways that we can do it without necessarily the students are using AI to complete an assignment versus they're interacting with the AI to complete an assignment. And that way we can see their own learning. All right.
I'll just say, but we got to be careful, right? When we're talking about tech-free kind of settings, right? So
yeah,
do we care whether students, does that mean don't use Microsoft Word to check your spelling? Does that mean, right? Like, what are we talking about in today's minimal standard for what is acceptable tech use is going to change. So just to keep that in mind.
And Ed Beck made a point in the chat, which I think is very, very spot on. Thank you. It's remarkable how different we talk about faculty use of AI and student use of AI. When we're talking about faculty, we talk about how faculty were adding value to AI and their expertise still shines through. But when we talk about students, we seem to be despondent in saying, how can we assess anything? So yes, that is a lot of what the rhetoric we're seeing for sure. I do want to be mindful of our time and move on to our next question, which is about feedback and formative learning. In what ways can AI be leveraged to provide more timely and personalized feedback while maintaining academic rigor and human connection? Jeannie.
I feel like I should partner with you on this response, Wendy, since you're in the classroom doing some really creative things. I'm still really a novice in this space, but I see potential, right? I understand there are AI agents we can leverage in certain kinds of ways. We can I think we can use AI to improve the kind of the clarity and intentionality of the things we're trying to accomplish, whether that's through a rubric formation or just the exercise we've been talking about. If we're intentional about what we're trying to teach, what we want students to learn, then how do we map that onto these assessment tools, and that critical reflective practice, I think improves the teaching and learning enterprise, right? Whether it's AI or something else. So I think where I see promise in AI too is to help with some of those routinized repetitive tasks that can take a lot of time and mental bandwidth, that in theory, if it's outsourced to AI, we have more time for meaningful connections and interactions. I have not exercised that in a direct way. I don't have good examples of that, but I see the potential for that. And I bet my colleagues will have models or ideas to follow on that.
Debora or Sam?
Sam, go ahead. I can follow up.
Sure. So I'll be quick. So here, I'll just attack it from answer it from a philosophical perspective, which is that I think let's think about it not as replacing human feedback, but accelerating cycles of feedback. So I think it's versions of what Jeannie was saying. But so, at best, sometimes in a previous kind of course, I could give one round of feedback on rough drafts to my students prior to them turning in a final assignment. And boy, I struggled even to balance the workload of that. With these kind of tools, why can't I now do not just 2 rounds of feedback, 3 rounds of feedback using AI to help me assist in providing feedback, but 12 rounds of feedback, 25 rounds of feedback? In other words, what we give up on this kind of old model of maybe trying to particularly focus on human interaction, we now can provide accelerated. And I would argue the 25 rounds of feedback might be actually more valuable than the 1 round of unassisted human feedback.
Yeah, I would also say there's some opportunities just to begin to experiment as you're teaching and as you're working through some of these items. I have found AI to be very helpful, particularly when I create a project. So I give it parameters in a paid account so that I have more control over what is being shared and where it's being shared, and some of all of those types of things. But I'm also able to train my AI assistant to know what course I'm teaching or what policy brief I may have to be giving, or whatever the topic may be. Those parameters are really helpful to spend a little bit of time there, making sure that the AI can be a teaching partner or a education partner. So that said, one of the things I think AI is particularly good at is pattern recognition, right? Is looking across a wide body of work and understanding the patterns that may emerge in it. So one thing that means it can do is, 1, look at things against a set of standards. So rubrics are a set of standards, right? They tell us what our learning outcomes are, and they put that forward. So I have certainly used AI to help me create rubrics, something I tend to do a lot in my job. But also I've done things like, here's the rubric I'm using for this assignment, and uploaded an assignment against it and said, tell me what you think about this. How is this working across this? I've also checked my own outcomes against assignments I've written, right? Is this working? I'm saying this is the learning outcome. Here's the rubric I've developed for it. Here's the assignment write-up. Is this actually hitting this in the same way? And had that conversation around that and looked across that. A piece of that can also be, here's some essays that I've graded or a project I've looked at, and the grades I've assigned or the pieces, the feedback that I've given, and asking AI to say, have I missed anything? Is there something across this body of work that I haven't honed in on? And I will tell you that there is, right? Oftentimes the answer is yes, or yes and, right? Yes, we see this, but across all of this, your students in particular, you cite lack of effective evidence 15 times in 15 essays. I'm making this up, right? But being able to see a pattern I might have sort of had an inkling for, but didn't fully grasp until I've looked at it across the body. Now that is essentially individual assessment work. So when we take that up to another level, beginning to look across patterns, right? Are we seeing across sections or across areas? We've also used that, again, taking this up a notch, which is not 100% the formative feedback question, but this is formative for us too, formative for our own work, what we're doing as educators, how we're approaching that. We've taken assessment results from maybe a couple of different areas and looked at that within AI and said, did we miss something here? And oftentimes, again, the answer is yes, and did you notice this, or in this one and this one? So those types of conversations you can have institutionally, you can have as an instructor, but there are ways of really sort of pushing your work forward. I do also think quite literally, saying, here's a great way of framing this feedback on this point. You're saying that your students are not using effective evidence. Here's a better way of framing that, like challenging my own ways of doing it. I've been teaching for a really long time. That also means that sometimes I do things the same way I've done them before. So challenging myself is a good thing in my own teaching practice.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Deborah? Because I love the way you describe that. Would you describe that as a type of co-teaching? That's what I would have said, right?
Yeah, I like to think, so I refer to it as my AI assistant. But yeah, I absolutely think we can think about, I like to work on my craft, right? I love education and I love teaching and I love learning, right? This is what I have a PhD in because I like it that much, right? So for me, this is a way to challenge myself and go further and think more. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I'm not necessarily saying I've cracked the nut on all of these things, but spending the time to think about, again, creating a project frame in an AI tool, maybe it's ChatGPT, maybe it's Gemini, maybe it's Claude, maybe it's a couple of those, there are different tools out there, but spending the time to really think about training my AI assistant, again, that's just my little cute terminology for myself, is useful and helpful and gives me more control in that experimentation. But yes, I would say maybe it's a TA. We don't get TAs at community college, but it's nice to have one on occasion.
Right. We did get a question in the chat. Can you address the mental health implications of using AI, especially the social isolation factors of students relying on AI instead of peers to collaborate?
Somebody mentioned already, I forget, someone, I can't attribute The generative AI didn't do it. A human gave it, but someone said the yes and kind of model, right? Which is like first, like, well, why not have both, right? Why not have peer feedback and AI feedback? And sure, if you just get your feedback from an AI, it can be isolating. I would offer, how many courses do students take where there is little to no feedback from the professor until they turn in a term paper at the end of the course and get a grade? And is that any different in terms of isolation versus interacting with an AI tool? I would say it's worse. And no one probably, even on this Zoom call does stuff like that. You're all here because you care. And so you're spending your extra time talking and trying to explore and understand. But I bet we all know at least one professor who has done this and continues to do it. And so I would argue, I would say I'm less in my priority list. I'm less concerned about the social isolation of AI and it just actually providing richer, deeper interaction around learning opportunities, and include in my own courses, I include peer feedback.
Peer review. I do think that there's a sort of underlying philosophical statement here, right? And one of the things that we've talked a lot about in our work at FLCC and with our AI hub and et cetera, is sort of establishing some basic philosophical tenets that are really important to us. And one is human-led AI, right? Co-create, don't abdicate is one of the ways we like to put that in a cute little phrase. Again, I'm full of cute phrases today, but the idea here is you're the instructor, we are the faculty, right? We are the educators, right? Whatever level we're talking about here. And so choosing to say, hey, I want to build in this use of AI in my class, or I want to use it myself as an instructor. Maybe I'm not going to use it with my students per se, whatever that means. But and saying, maybe this is a concern I have. I want to really make sure I have a robust peer review process. And here are the tools I'm going to use for it. And here's how I'm going to scaffold that and structure that and maybe assess that, right? There are there's lots of good research on good ways to assess peer review processes as well as, group collaboration processes. So in the end, we are designing these classes, we are teaching these classes, right? So we want to approach it again from our expertise and thinking about what is the learning outcome, what is the experience we want our students to have, what is the walk out the door knowledge, and building the educational experiences around that. So I do think it's really, really important as we go into this new emergent technology, one that's changing very, very rapidly, right? And therefore we have to continue to change, that we maintain basic philosophical principles that guide us as educators. And, we have talked about that at FLCC from a perspective of human-led AI, not perfectly. We have not, solved all of these problems, but I think it's important to say that out loud and to talk about that out loud.
Jeannie?
I would just echo the human-led part of this. The human interaction is critical. But when I talk to our students about the ways in which they're using AI, it's often like the ones who've been really creative about having AI serve as a study partner, what have you. They're doing that at 2 o'clock in the morning, or they're doing that at a time that's convenient to their schedule. And that's not when our faculty is hosting an office hour, right? So there's this, it's a different level of access and opportunity that needs to be, bounded and supported and defined, I think, and best as best as we can. But there are, I think it's been said before that it's a both and. It's the AI can be isolating, but let's partner it with the peer and with the faculty led work so that we are thinking about. I mean, it's social isolation is a problem since the pandemic that we see in a lot of places. So I think this is, it's not, I don't think it's AI's fault, to echo Sam's comment, but we should be mindful and intentional and thinking holistically about our students and their experience is, I think, an important first step.
And I'm going to echo this a little bit because I have seen reports and things regarding the potential social isolation aspect of AI. But I would also say we see it in the gaming world as well. We have mental health issues. Our students right now are particularly vulnerable, having come from the experience of COVID. We're still all recovering from that. I think we moved in a really good direction, but there's still issues. And we're aware of it. And I think one, leaning into our mental health counselors on campus, learning ourselves how to recognize mental health issues in our students and direct them to the right resources. When you have a student who's consistently coming in late, not showing up, looking more and more weary, and sometimes just a simple "How are you doing?" can help with that kind of thing. Whether the AI is isolating, or they're isolating for gaming, or they're just deeming themselves antisocial and not willing to come out of their room, right? There's a lot of safety measures we can put in place to help recognize a mental health crisis and help direct students to the right resources with that. So I don't think engaging with AI as an instructional tool is necessarily to blame for the mental health crisis we have going on. There's so many other factors, but I get the sentiment that's being raised by it, the over-reliance of, ChatGPT as your friend that you chat with on your phone on a regular basis. I get that, and I can see that being a problem. But much as it's on us to learn, I think, to adapt and help our students adapt to this new paradigm shift in education, we also have to adapt to the mental health issues we're seeing on campus as well. I literally had my students take a moment, take a deep breath, and scream today. Like, just scream, let it out, let the tension go, and then we'll continue forward. So yeah, there's ways for sure. What time are we at here? We're almost at 2, and I do want to leave enough time for broader Q&A with everyone, everyone that's still with us. I think one last question I do want to hit on, and this is probably a lot in Jeannie's wheelhouse, and this is on institutional policy and accreditation. How can colleges and universities align AI-informed assessment practices with accreditation requirements and academic integrity policies?
I think alignment is the key word there, right? It's so much easier said than done. But there are some key considerations in this work that include the data privacy and security piece that has come up. There's always some legal issues. There's this notion of, as we've been talking about, combining sort of the human aspect with the technical aspect, and being able to mediate it in that important way. I do think our accreditors are expecting us to have clear policies and guidelines and procedures. I actually just sent to our AI committee the July guidance that Middle States has published, that again is not prescriptive about what those policies should be, but that there needs to be guidance, that your community needs to come together and make recommendations and do what makes sense, both in terms of the best practices and kind of legal landscape, but really, I really appreciate that the focus is on the learning enterprise and how we make meaning of that. So it's we at our institution are going through a strategic planning process. We have a new president. We are trying to make visible these processes and considerations so that alignment is more likely to happen. But it is iterative, and it is kind of cyclical in its approach. So it is. I don't have a magic formula or magic silver bullet to offer, but it needs to be a part of the conversation and with lots of different stakeholders and with lots of different folks. But get those guidelines worked out. That's going to be a really important part of the work.
Sam or Deborah?
I would really echo what Jeannie said insofar as the guidance thus far is that there needs to be a process and there's and engagement with these questions. I am on a group, on a committee, I'm not sure what we're called, on AI and assessment with other Middle States folks, and the conversations there have been very much about making sure that this is part and parcel of academic senate conversations, whatever the policy making is that goes on the academic side of the house. How is it being engaged in? Because I think there's a broad understanding that this is not something we're going to fix once and then never look at again. There is also absolutely a very wide conversation about the fact that we really want to be thinking about AI as a tool, not as a separate thing. So we have a lot of different technological tools that are around our learning processes. So really making sure that we're not fully creating it as separate, but that we're thinking about issues around integrity and equity and access as we would with other tools that we engage in. That doesn't mean we engage with it in the same way, but that's an important part of it. And Middle States is very, very clear about the fact that this is about how the college is approaching it. They're not prescriptive. They're saying you must engage. I would also offer that there are a lot of really good opportunities to use AI tools to support accreditation processes. And as I said, pattern recognition is something that AI does very, very well, and looking at standards and looking at responses to standards and evidence to standards is essentially a pattern recognition process. So there are a lot of really good ways to be thinking and thinking early on in an accreditation cycle about how to do that in order to spend more time having engaging conversations about areas that we may want to improve or what this means, rather than spending as much time on what can be very onerous in terms of compliance and setup and logistics.
I agree with everyone who's talking about this. I'd say at the core of it, there's a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding. And in fact, Dana Antonucci Durgan, who's in this chat, who's in the webinar right now, is working with me and conducting research on trying to identify just how different faculty and students are in terms of like academic integrity and the use of generative AI. Are we even talking the same language or not? And start there with that kind of understanding. And hopefully that can help not just the top-down approach to policy creation, but a bottom-up approach in combination.
Great, thank you. So first, I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their expertise in these areas with us. But now we're a little after 2, and I would like to open it up for a greater conversation with our attendees and any questions they might have. So you feel free to raise your hand so I can we can call on you, or type something into the chat. We are monitoring the chat. I am not seeing any questions. Well, if we don't have any questions, there is one question I had for our panelists that we kind of skipped over. So let me grab that and throw this in here. So assessment design and creativity, how might AI push us to rethink the kinds of cognitive and creative skills we value, moving from recall and reproduction towards synthesis, critique, and innovation? Sam, you want to take that one?
Sure. So I'm just rereading
it.
the question, so I feel like I
Yeah.
Understand it. I was depending sometimes on you posting it. So
Yeah, I just put it in the chat.
Cognitive and creative skills. So in an effort to kind of focus on like the progressive kind of view of this, is that I would say this kind of paradigm shift of generative AI that's having on higher ed is allowing us to kind of, we should literally revalue cognitive skills. What we before might have valued reproduction, right? Recall, reproduction, the ability to go out and transfer a skill you learn in a course to a new setting, which still will have value. But now we potentially need to add to that at an equal level, a focus on synthesis, critique, and innovation, creativity, now maybe more than ever, especially when you have these kind of technology that can potentially try to take over creativity and generation. Perhaps that's then the focus in terms of creating new types of assessment or designs.
Debora?
I think this is part and parcel of what we've been talking about today. Exactly what we're teaching and what our students are learning. There are going to be fundamentals that absolutely remain the same, but as we move forward, how we engage with that, the steps we approach to it are changing, and we see that changing already. Example I gave about teaching coding, when code can be produced by AI, that becomes a fundamentally different approach, but it still requires teaching foundational knowledge, understanding how to when to apply the tool, when not to apply the tool, what it allows you to build when you're thinking about the architecture, say, of a database and what you're building out. Being able to creatively and effectively build that out and understand what you're working towards still needs to come from the human mind. And the human mind needs to understand those foundational tools, but having more space to spend that time on that creative endeavor is a new opportunity. We don't fully know the exact answer to what is that going to mean in the industry? What is that going to mean for computer scientists? But as those computer scientists in industry are engaging with that as well, we will engage with it in our classrooms and as educators. So there's no question there is going to be a change, and there's an opportunity, as I think Sam has argued throughout our time together today, to ourselves reassess, right? What are we spending time on? How do we approach it? Is there a different way to assess this? Is there a different way to ask for students to engage with that? I like to think of that as an opportunity to engage in my craft, but I don't think it's momentary. I think this is ongoing. And we're in a really unsure time right now, so we're thinking through it sort of in the moment, and then we're going to have to rethink about it in that next moment. I'm choosing to think of that as exciting.
Right. One thing I want to kind of go back to a little bit is we talked very early on in this discussion about especially with equity and access, that it's really on our institutions to ensure that students get access to these tools. How do we make that argument, especially in such financial constraints as many of our institutions are finding themselves, to invest in this new tool, both for our internal workings, for staff and faculty, but also for our students?
It's a very good question. And it's a big question. And it's also a system question, meaning I think there is also a need to engage, not just at the institutional level, but at the system level with that kind of question. But I think overall, there are a couple of really important things there. One, we do have a responsibility to engage with tools that our students need to learn. Now, there are ways to do that in financially responsible ways, like looking at not necessarily adopting a full enterprise solution, but adopting tools specifically for different units that need them, program specific and so forth, in order to keep some costs down. Certainly, as I'm referencing system tools, thinking about what kind of access do students have to a sort of professional level basic generative AI tool, that is something that would be great to have a system solution for, so that those costs can be borne over the sort of system as opposed to only in a singular institution. There's absolutely, and I'm sure we don't really have our CFO wing here represented in the assessment conversation, but I think there are also some important conversations that should be had, and should be had by us as assessment professionals, as educators, as well as by the sort of CFO wing, about efficiencies that can be created. What does that mean? What kinds of long-term savings might be able to be created? Sure, absolutely. But at this point, to not engage in the conversation, I think, is a much greater risk. And when we think about protecting our institution and serving our mission, which is what we are asked to do, we always have to balance risk, right? And is there a risk of, spending a certain amount of money or doing some initial investment? That's one level of risk, is spending that money when there are limited dollars to be spent. In my mind, though, and based on this extensive conversation that we've all been having for the last, hour and a half together, the risk is much greater to say we can't afford that conversation. That's not serving our students, and that is antithetical to our mission. So I think we also have to advocate as educators and as folks deeply engaged in assessment work, which I assume many of you are, given your willingness to spend this time with us, to say this is an important conversation, and we need to figure out the best way we can balance that. And I don't think the answer is, oh, just use Copilot or just do that. I think you know what I'm talking about, Sam. Right, I think it needs to be a bigger conversation, and I absolutely believe it is incumbent upon our leadership writ large, and I put myself in that role. I'm a leader at my college, to say, how do we make this happen? How do we allow innovation to happen? How do we allow experimentation to happen in a financially responsible way?
Okay, thank you. Sam?
I'll just say, echoing everything Debora was saying, this is a utility, not a almost a technology, right? This is something that everyone should have access to, and and just to keep up the tradition of hot takes, like we've got millions of dollars that we're willing to spend on AI, research and projects about kind of exploring new business ways that AI can be used. We can't find ways to do that for generative AI tools and make them available to every single part of the SUNY system, right? From every single community college, from every single four-year institution across the board. We can. Some of this technology is open source, right? And by the way, SUNY has had a past tradition and success at doing this kind of work, right? There have been open educational resource initiatives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there's no reason to think that we won't be doing this going forward. So I'm actually, I think it's a matter of demand. It's a matter of advocacy. Yes, absolutely. It's incumbent on us to advocate for it. But I'm also somewhat positive in that I think the outcome could, in fact, be every single SUNY student has access to the technology that they need, especially since it scales. And it's not just Microsoft Copilot, but you have other things too.
Yes, Jeannie?
So every SUNY student, every SUNY faculty member, staff member, right? It's the whole ecosystem. I think I'm still using a free version of the tools that I access frequently, and I'm always a little flummoxed when I get to that. I'm sorry, you have reached the limit of your free.
Yes.
You've got to come back in some number of hours. So there are these sort of hiccups.
I think
get
that can be
annoying.
very frustrating too.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Right.
So that efficiency all of a sudden just, ground to a
Mhm.
halt. Yeah.
Right. And I think too, the argument we can make to our institutions is it gets back to that equity piece, where students absolutely may not have the means otherwise to have access to the more robust versions of the tool, if they didn't get it through the college.
Mhm.
Um, what I would like to do now, one is ask again, are there any questions or thoughts from our participants that remain with us?
There's a new
See,
question in the chat, Wendy.
there's a new one in the chat. Thank you, Kane. All right, so Bruce, given the possibilities for educating oneself through AI and YouTube videos and all the rest that are around now, how do we make the case for higher education and paying for it? How do we respond to the charge that a college education is not worth it?
Always good to end with a good
Yeah.
major philosophical question. So in my mind, this is not new, right? There's been some fervent, renewed conversation about this, certainly in the last few years, but we have always had a certain amount of rhetoric, at least in the United States, around, why do you need that? Or, that's only for, or, whatnot. AI is a tool, and it's a tool that one needs to learn how to use. Sure, there's a technical aspect to it, and some of that technical aspect may be more specific in certain fields and may grow into more need in specific areas. But ultimately, the ability to critically think, assess, and use a given tool are skills that we teach in higher education. That is what we do. And I don't care what you're majoring in, right? You are coming into higher education to engage with thought, to assess thought, to make decisions, to be able to solve problems. And when we look at all of the wide variety of surveys that are done for employers, that when you talk with people who hire people, any of those very workforce driven things, these very same sort of like cadres of conversations, and you ask them, what do you want your students, your future workers, the folks you're hiring next year to be able to do? They will tell you, I want them to be able to critically think. I need them to be able to work with others. I need them to be able to problem solve. I need them to be able to write. I need them to be able to communicate, etc. Right? That remains fundamental. And AI is, yes, a new tool, but the ability to use it, to effectively say it's being used well, to know when to apply it, that is all still critical thinking and problem solving. And that is what we do, and we do it very well. We can continue to do it better. There's always ways of getting better at it, but that is not going to change. And my last little example of that will be, if you look at the field of paralegal, this has been a field where there has been very early adoption of AI in law firms and in that field in particular. And there have been some fairly public and widespread, or at least media reported, mass layoffs of folks in paralegal, et cetera, et cetera. We have a paralegal program at FLCC, as many community colleges do. And one of the things that we have noticed in our work with our students, as well as our work with our advisory board, and what we're hearing more broadly in the field is, yes, that field is changing, but the paralegals that are going to be successful and the paralegals that are going to be hired are the ones that know how to use those tools well, when to apply them, when not to apply them, how to effectively ascertain that they are being used correctly, and still be able to do that in an office and legal environment with all of the things I just talked about, writing and reading and critical thinking and communicating with others. I think we will work through this and we will figure out how this tool best serves our learning. But I don't think the fundamental question of what higher education offers is answered differently. I think it's still the same.
And just to add to that, I think one of the things that I know we're guilty of at our institution, and I think across higher ed in general, is we do not do a great job of linking what workforce employers are looking for and the skills that our students are building, especially in the liberal arts class. I think we need to do a better job of identifying where we are building those skills and putting it right in our course outlines, our syllabi, so that students can point to this and say, hey, I learned this, and now I can list this as a skill on my resume. I think that's something we need to do. And whether that's, doing a content analysis of what we have and what we offer, or even maybe changing the statement of our learning outcomes to better reflect the skill they will gain through interacting with whatever our discipline and subject might be.
And when the AACMU has done that mapping, like we don't have to reinvent that wheel, right? There's a strong literature base on which we can draw, as well as sort of employer surveys, that the work that NACE has done that helps us link the kinds of fundamental learning that's happening in our college classrooms, particularly in the liberal arts, to the world of work, to that it's a translator, right? We need our students to be effective translators of their own experience into the world of work. And again, what we're offering in this higher ed space is a holistic approach, right? You can kind of pick and choose and find content out there in the world. And that's exciting. I've fixed things in my house thanks to YouTube, right? Those are some good things. It democratizes it in a way. But I haven't sort of thought about it in a larger way. And if I'm in a collegiate environment, I'm challenged to do that and to make the connections and to see opportunities for not only a future that I may not even imagine for myself yet, but sort of understanding and being a good citizen, being a good participant in our democracy. I mean, there's all kinds of elements here that are I think are critical to the higher ed space. But to be clear, we have not been good ambassadors. We haven't done a great job of making that case to the broader society. We've been in our own echo chamber, and I think that's an opportunity.
Okay, well, I would like to very much thank our panelists. So Jeannie, Sam, and Debora, thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly important conversation. Hopefully our members that joined us today found it very useful. If you have not seen it in the chat, there will be this recording of this webinar will be posted on the SUNY Council for Assessment website, where you can access that and our past Zoom-ins as well if you are interested. Please share with your colleagues who couldn't make it today. And just probably my last parting thought is this is definitely a paradigm shift for us as much as it is for the technical world. And we could retreat, much like my husband did. He was a data architect, and he's like, nope, I can't do another paradigm shift. And he retired, and now he's doing home improvement work. Or we can embrace it and help our students see what this new paradigm shift means for their education as well. So again, thank you all for joining us. I hope you have a lovely afternoon. And thank you, Jeannie, Sam, and Debora. And thank you, Kane, for helping me get this off the ground and
Yeah,
CPD for all your support.
Yeah, I just want to say a few words. I'm Kane Gillespie, co-chair of SCoA. I want to thank Wendy for putting all the work into this, as well as our panelists. This has been an extremely enlightening session. I think we had almost 130 people here at one point, which is really fabulous.
Right.
Really great job, everybody. Thank you to CPD, Chris Price and Kay for helping us get this off the ground as well. Really fabulous. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I see we've dwindled a bit, but I want to thank everybody who's still here for joining us, and we'll do something again in the future. Stay tuned.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.